everybody. My name is Stephen Friedrich. I'm a pastor at Peace Lutheran Church in Knoxville, Tennessee.
And I am Nancy Christensen. I am a recently retired ELCA pastor from Atlanta, Georgia.
Wonderful, Nancy. Thanks so much for being with me and here today to share your baptism story. And I guess just before we dive in, my baptism story, briefly, in very brief form, is I was baptized here in Knoxville, Tennessee, at Messiah Lutheran Church on January 27th of 1984. 85, sorry, 85. My favorite quote at the moment is that my mom said, "It wasn't a deeply spiritual moment, but it was exactly what it needed to be."
Oh, that's good. I like
Thanks,
that.
Mom. Thanks, Mom. So, Nancy, what's your baptismal story?
So my baptismal story is interesting because I don't really know it. I was born in 1959 and was baptized sometime that year, probably after I was born. Um, but I was born on the third anniversary of the death of my brother. Um, so my parents had a daughter and a son, and the son died when he was 5. And about a year later, they had another daughter, my older sister, um, who fortunately didn't have his coloring and um, was blonde haired, blue eyed. So she was kind of had the genes of my dad's side. But 2 years later, on the exact date of the anniversary of his death, I was born and I had the same coloring that he had. I had from my mom's side, the olive skin and the dark hair. And I think it threw my parents for a loop. Um, and they struggled. They struggled a lot. And when I was a little kid, and it was 1950s, so there was no real vehicles for them to grieve. They didn't have counseling, they didn't have family counseling. Um, so my childhood, while I knew I was loved, certainly knew I was loved. And I don't ever fault my parents. They did the best they could. But my my events weren't really captured. There are very few pictures of me as a child. I don't know things like baptismal anniversaries or any of those kinds of things. My birthdays were often ignored, uh, skipped over. There was a friend up the street who had the same birthday, and so I was very often kind of included in his birthday party. Um, and it was a day for my parents to to grieve and to remember my brother. Um, so it wasn't until I was junior high that baptism even was on my radar. I was a churchgoer. I went to church. I knew the words, but um, when I was in the 7th grade, we, as part of confirmation, we went to the Synod youth event. Now it's called Affirm. Then it was called Youth Awareness Seminar. A weird name, but anyway.
That's a great
um,
name. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, very 70s. Anyway, I went to that event when I was the summer after my 7th grade year and kind of learned about baptism there for the first time and participated in a remembrance of baptism service. And that's when I think it kind of sunk in that I was a baptized child of God and that I was beloved and that I was part of something that was bigger than my family and bigger than me. Um, that I was part of God's circle. Um, and it was significant to me to kind of realize that and to discover that. And that's what's really stuck with me through the years. Just that sense of belonging and knowing that God does the choosing and that God does the loving, um, has been a huge piece of where baptism has really been significant in my life, even to this day.
Yeah,
Um,
that's beautiful, Nancy. I mean, your story is, I mean, that's so challenging. I mean, I can't imagine
yeah,
for your parents what that what that was like for them. But I appreciate your grace of saying, you know, they did the best they could and they loved you.
absolutely.
Um,
And
and
and through the years, I have, um, before their deaths, we were very close. We developed a really close relationship, and we worked hard, to kind of come to terms with everything and to figure it all out together. And so I don't have any I don't have any regrets or any, it was hard as a child, I will say it was hard. And I didn't understand, so it wasn't talked about in our family. Um,
sure,
it was kind of before the days of disclosure. It was during a time in the world where if something bad happened to you, you just pressed forward and you kind of put everything away. So we didn't have any pictures of him or we didn't talk about it at all as I was growing up. So it wasn't until I was an adult that I really began to fully appreciate and understand what my parents had gone through and how hard it must have been for them. And to understand a little more about my own history and what I had experienced as well.
sure.
Yeah,
And I mean, how powerful though that even in the midst of all of that, they still brought you for baptism.
they did. Yes,
And
they did.
they still and God was still faithful in the midst of that.
Yes.
And like you were saying to me, that belonging that God does the choosing. And
Right.
even if your parents are going through all this thing, and even if you don't have really an awareness of it till you get to middle school, or I mean, like in my story, I knew that I was baptized, but I didn't know when I was baptized until I went to candidacy and had to fill out the form.
Mm. Yeah,
um, you know, and even if you don't know much about it or anything about it,
right.
it's what God has done. God, like you
That's
said, I
right.
love your phrase. God does the choosing. God does the loving.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
that's
And we as people, as humans, are never going to get it right. And no matter what we're dealing with in our lives, no matter how hard or how lost we are, um, God still shows up, and God is still part of it, and God is still in the midst of it, and God is still loving us. That even when we don't know that we're loved, God is loving us, and that's what I needed. I when I was a teenager and I kind of got that for the first time, it changed my life, and it has been a part of who I am ever since. Because it's when you grow up and you know that you're the source of pain, but you don't really know why. Um, it's important to know that God is showing up regardless.
yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Amen. Thank you. Thank
Amen.
you. Thank you. Well, is now that is some really good and profound teaching. Was there anything else you wanted to? Oh, I really want to teach on something else because that's an amen right there. That's beautiful. So,
I think I always, when I was in the parish and I was working with couples that were baptizing their child, I would always say, we're celebrating in the church what God has already done.
mm,
That coming to baptism and having the water put on your head is wonderful, and it's a great celebration for the church, and it's a great way for the church to publicly affirm um, God's loving kindness and God's grace. But God has already done it. We don't have to. It's not. There's not some magic wand that happens when the water is poured. It is God's action, and God has already accomplished that. And so God already loves your child. So I always try to, there's sometimes couples come with a little bit of worry that if they think somehow God isn't loving their child yet. Um, and I just always want to reassure them. And I think that's part of my own thing, my
Yeah.
own history, to be able to say to them, no, God is already there. You don't have to depend. It's not dependent on you. And I know that's basically a rewording of what I've already said, but I just always it just always seems like a good message that we're celebrating what God has already done.
Yes, indeed. Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thanks everybody for watching and for hearing Pastor Nancy's story and her witness to God's incredible love and God's choosing. Now, if you've not been baptized, this choosing and love of God is for you too, and we would love to celebrate that with you and extend that grace of God to you. So reach out to me, reach out to Pastor Nancy. We can get you connected with a congregation closer to where you are, because the truth is that God does choose you. God does love you. And we would love to celebrate that in a public way together. And if you already have been baptized, we really encourage you just to lean into that and embrace that, yeah, no matter what else is going on, God does love you. You are chosen by God as one of God's kids, part of God's family. So thanks for watching. Blessings as you continue to live this life of baptism. Take care, everybody. See ya.
Thanks.